Thank you, Naveen. I've been a trade unionist for much of my life, and I'm still getting introduced as a former commissioner of BC Human Rights. I want to just, put away my prepared comments, and I just want to respond to some of what our panel members have said. Cecilia, you came here and stood in solidarity with us. We stand in solidarity with you and with the native people of this country who have been, what the Canadian government has done to the First Nations is criminal, is beyond criminal. I mean, most of those politicians who've done this should be in jail, because here are the people who have welcomed you and you treat them this way. You destroy their languages, you destroy their culture, and take the kids away from them. Put them in concentration camps, so they will not remember their culture, they will not remember their traditions. What can be more criminal than that? I feel bad that I haven't personally done enough to stand in solidarity with you, and that's why I applaud people like Harshan and Harjap who's doing this. And Gurpreet. We get so involved in some of our minor problems, we don't stand with one another, and that's our problem. And the government gets away with it. The government is getting, and Harper is getting away with it now. I mean, the way he's treating the First Nations, the way he's treating the trade union movement, and through some of his backbenchers. I want to come back and, first of all, thank Mr. Janelle Singh for the wonderful exhibit that he's got in this other room. If you haven't seen, please go and see it. I want to congratulate Gurpreet for writing this book. I want to congratulate those who have encouraged them to do it and to talk about and speak about and write about these issues which are important to our history. Well, history is important because of what our history is all about. You wouldn't know me until you know who I am, where I came from, what my roots are, who were my forefathers, what kind of struggle they've gone through. Similarly, I wouldn't know you unless I know your history. We learn from history so that we become better people, so that we have better control over our future. So I applaud Gurpreet for writing about the kinds of issues you've been writing about. Now, I was asked to talk about how the discriminatory policies of the government make us resist with the First Nations and South Asian immigrants. I mean, I've been thinking about this issue, and I think the best thing I can do is talk about some events, talk about some historical events, my own experiences, and how they relate to our struggle for equality. Well, I came here in 1970 at the age of 19. I worked in some farms for a few months. My first real job was in a sawmill, because at that point in time, I saw more than half of the workers in sawmills were Indo-Canadians. I became active in the union. I started attending union meetings because I had been, active in the student union movement. I thought it was something similar. I became a member of the New Westminster Local of the IWA. We used to have monthly meetings in New Westminster. One day, an older member said to me, "I want you to come with me. We're going to go see Harold." Well, I said, fine. It took me to a small place, a house either in Coquitlam or Port Coquitlam. I didn't know who this person was. It turned out to be a person by the name of Harold Pritchett. He was the first international president of the IWA. He offered me a beer. He pulled out a drawer of photographs. To my amazement, he was talking about the Indo-Canadian community. He showed me photographs of the delegation that had gone to Victoria either in 46 or 47, and to meet with the ministers to demand that the Indo-Canadians should have the right to vote in British Columbia. He was part of that delegation. Now, I later learned because Indo-Canadians there were so many members of the IWA, that some of the progressive elements of the IWA were really, felt the discrimination being felt by Indo-Canadians. Well, he showed me some flyers from mills, sawmills, and plywood mills that clearly showed Indo-Canadians and Chinese there was a Chinese rate of pay for Chinese, another rate of pay for Indo-Canadians, and a higher rate of pay for white Canadians. He talked about the discrimination faced by the trade unionists in 30s and 40s, how they had to not only contend with the police, but also the company goons. He talked about the discrimination faced by the Indo-Canadian community. It was a fascinating conversation. I was 20 years old and Harold must have been in 70s. I regret the day I never got to meet him again. I became active in the IWA. In 1972, I was hired as the editor of the local union's paper called The Chipper. And I would help out in organizing drives. One of the first organizing drives I was involved in a small place called Consumer Pallet. It was a small mill in Burnaby. I know Raj worked there for a few months, but I think he may have left before the organizing drive. The issue really was the way the employer treated Indo-Canadian workers. It took a violent struggle to unionize this place. Soon after we unionized it, the workers went on strike because the employer was not willing to pay higher wages. They paid much lower wages and benefits than the rest of the mills. The employer continued to operate. The trade union movement in 70s was quite strong. The BC Federation of Labour declared a hot edict on the products of this outfit. So when they take out the trucks with the products, the members, mostly Indo-Canadian, would follow them. There were a lot of injuries, a lot of cars were smashed, but eventually we were able to win the strike. But what was significant, not the improvement in wages and conditions, what was significant to the workers was the treatment they received after this because they had the union behind them. They felt that's much more precious to us than the improvement in our wages. Soon after that, I became involved in organizing farm workers. Raj is here, Sharon is here. We set up a committee called Farm Workers Organizing Committee. What was troubling to us, not only the way the workers were treated in the farms, there was no protection, no legislative protection. Another worker, if worked for an employer, even a non-union employer, could go to the Employment Standards Branch, whatever it was called in those days, and say this employer didn't pay my wages. Not the farm workers. Not only did they not have protection under the hours of work, minimum wages, or anything else, they could not even complain that they have not been paid. I remember in '79, a demonstration going outside the Hyatt Regency Hotel and presenting a petition to Bill Bennett, asking for legislation, protection under the existing legislation for farm workers. We submitted a brief on behalf of the committee, of which I was a member, but basically said the farm workers should be treated no different than any other worker. There should be equality under the law. I mean, what was heartening to us, we were a group of small committee members. The support we received from the labor movement, BC Federation of Labour, Canadian Labour Congress, the Independent Union, CCU, they all came out and supported us. I think we made enough noise that they were ashamed to bring us under the Employment Standards Act, bring the farm workers under the Employment Standards Act. And although that equality, that struggle still continues because the equality is still not there. although the workers were brought under the Employment Standards Act, the protection they have is still inferior to other workers. Just around the same time, although our focus was foreign workers, there were a whole bunch of attacks, racist attacks on members of our community. Ku Klux Klan was organizing. There was a fire bombing somewhere in Delta. There was a young man was killed, and people would come and attack homes, throw eggs. I mean, when you are a new immigrant in a new land, that's extremely unsettling, extremely stressful. And we set up an organization called BC Organization to Fight Racism. By the way, I had a very small role in all of this. There were a whole lot of other people. When we set up the BC Organization to Fight Racism, the first meeting, the founding meeting, took place at the office of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. There was a woman by the name of Rose Letizia, who was one of the prominent members of that organization, who was one of the founding members of that organization. And so was, there was a trade union member from Telephone Worker Union, Stuart Rush, who was one of the progressive lawyers. They were all serving on this organization. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is this organization was set up because there was a need at that time. Whenever there's a need, people respond by organizing. You know, I don't need to talk about the history of discrimination. All of the panel members, Cecilia talked about it, Charlie talked about it, Kim talked about it. You know, going back to the issue of 1906-7, immigration of South Asians. I think it was 1906 and 7, the 4,700 Indians came, that is East Indians, came to Canada, primarily Sikhs. And there was such a response, almost hysterical response by the white Canadians, because what was being written about in the press. And there was something called Asiatic Exclusion League that took out a demonstration which caused all the damage in Chinatown in 1907. What Charlie talked about the changes to the Immigration Act in 1908, 1909, around this time, which basically the government could take steps by order in council. It didn't have to be discussed or debated in Parliament. Basically, the cabinet could pass cabinet orders, and that's how the continuous journey rule was brought in. I mean, we all know what happened to the Komagata Maru. When the ship wasn't allowed to dock, it was the community that raised funds for the court case. When they were running out of rations, it was the community that gathered the funds to supply the rations to the ship. And that sort of brings me to what's happening now. The struggle for equality still continues, despite the fact that we're able to elect people like Jimmy Sims to Parliament, people like Raj Chauhan, Harry Benz to the legislature. And the issue really is, can we stand with one another? Can we stand with our native brothers and sisters to see what's going on? Cecilia said it right. What does it mean to apologize? Yes. I mean, Harper did that personally and said, it's going to be a new chapter. We're going to deal with each other with respect. Well, since that time, all kinds of funding that goes out to First Nations has been cut, and without any kind of discussion. It's to the point that there's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the federal government is not even sharing the documents with that commission. Which brings me to the conclusion, I mean, we talked about Idle No More, was the largest mobilization of First Nation people. It wasn't spontaneous, it had been brewing for many, many years. So basically the conclusion is the struggle continues. There's likely to be many more actions on the part of First Nations to bring about the equality that we really need in this country. Thank you.